Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria was just announced for the vacant lightweight title. And personally, I'm in a state of utter confusion. On one hand, one of my two favorite fighters in the world is going to be the undisputed lightweight champion. On the other hand, one of my two favorite fighters in the world is likely going to be separated from consciousness. And I think that it's going to be Charles Oliveira. I think that Ilia Topuria was the warrior who was foretold. I think he's one of the biggest supervillains the sport's ever seen. And I think he's well on his way to becoming the GOAT. That being said, Charles Oliveira is a terrifying fight for Ilia Topuria. So let's break down these fighters' skill sets, fight styles, and how this could potentially clash at UFC 317. Now, getting into Charles Oliveira first. There are two Oliveiras that we see. The Oliveira that we all know and love. High, tight Muay Thai guard, walking you down, bouncing on that lead leg, forward pressure. This is savage Oliveira. This is the Oliveira who submitted Gaethje, submitted Poirier, knocked out Michael Chandler in the second round, knocked out Beneil Dariush in the first round. And this is a terrifying fight for any human alive. I don't care if you're Derek Lewis. This Oliveira is a scary matchup for you. However, in recent fights, in the Arman Tsarukyan fight and the Michael Chandler fight, we've seen a bit more passive Oliveira. This Oliveira, still very good, still very skilled, still capable of beating Ilia Topuria if things go perfect. However, I don't think this is the best approach for Charles Oliveira to win this fight. Let's talk about passive Oliveira and what that looks like. Passive Oliveira is too willing to accept things. He's very good at wrestling, and he's got good striking, but it's not what makes Charles Oliveira's striking special. When Charles Oliveira's striking is at its best, he is walking you down with reckless abandon, but he doesn't walk straight into the pocket, which is going to be huge for this fight. If Charles Oliveira were to walk straight into the pocket against Ilia Topuria, he's going to get chinned. Charles Oliveira works best from a range I've sort of coined Muay Thai range or long boxing range. It's not quite kickboxing range, not quite where Israel Adesanya does his best work. However, it's not in the pocket. It's this little gray in-between area that I've coined Muay Thai range. Now, what attacks work best from this range? Long shots, twos, threes that are the long lead hook that Oliveira throws, as well as teeps and low kicks. Now, let's talk about the teep and the low kick, because that's going to be massive for Charles Oliveira in this fight. Ilia Topuria, because of his high and tight boxing style guard and his boxing footwork, is very heavy on this lead leg, which if you're heavy on the lead leg, it is incredibly hard to check kicks, and the kicks are going to hurt worse than against a guy like Charles Oliveira, who's very light on that lead leg. If you're light on the lead leg and they kick your leg, it's not near as painful as if you have a bunch of weight on there. So Charles Oliveira is going to have to use his teep to maintain distance, and he's going to have to use that leg kick to chop at Ilia Topuria's leg and hopefully drain some of that knockout power. Another thing that I think Charles can use is his wrestling. Charles Oliveira is a very good high-level wrestler. He's not, and now I know what you're going to say, he's a jiu-jitsu guy, but he's not just a jiu-jitsu guy. He has chain wrestling. We saw this in the Michael Chandler fight, where he shot in on double and single legs. Chandler would defend the first one, and then he'd transition to a knee tap, an ankle pick. So he has some judo in his bag. And of course, Charles Oliveira is a problem once the fight gets to the ground. However, if Charles Oliveira gets taken down by Ilia Topuria, who has very good Greco-Roman wrestling, which I think is going to be huge, it is not wise to shoot double and single legs against Charles Oliveira. He has such good front headlock chokes. He can sprawl. He's so good from that position. However, if you get the body lock, if you start to pick him up and throw him down, there is no chokes from there. And if you do that against the fence, Charles Oliveira has shown that he is willing to sit in guard with his head smashed up against the fence. We can't accept this if we're Charles Oliveira. We have to be working to get back to our feet. Now, as far as getting back to the striking, Charles Oliveira is going to be probably the hardest puncher that Ilia Topuria has ever faced. You could say Josh Emmett, but skill for skill, it's really not comparable between Charles Oliveira and Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett is all power, whereas Charles Oliveira has that same one-shot knockout power with loads more technique. So this on the feet is probably going to be the most dangerous matchup for Ilia Topuria. Now, he has had one moment in his career, one singular fight, where he looked vulnerable on the feet. And that was, of course, against Jai Herbert when he head kicked him, and then Ilia Topuria went on to wrestle and finish him with striking later in the second round. Now, what Jai Herbert was doing so well against Ilia Topuria was he was staying in that Muay Thai kickboxing range. Now, Jai Herbert's even taller than Charles Oliveira, longer than Oliveira, but Oliveira can mimic similar things because he's going to have a significant size and reach advantage. One of the things that Charles Oliveira doesn't do very much that I feel is going to hurt him in this fight is jabs. Jai Herbert was keeping Ilia Topuria on the end of the jab, and then when Ilia Topuria would try to counter off it, he would slip the counter and respond with the strikes. That's actually how he landed that head kick. Ilia Topuria went to overswing on a big right hand. He just put up that switch kick, bam, shin to chin. However, Charles Oliveira is not the counter striker that a lot of people think he is. He has good counters, he has an ability to counter, but oftentimes he'll leave himself open for that initial shot. He's more of a take one to give one than avoid and counter like McGregor was. So I do think that on the feet, Oliveira needs to keep his distance. And how this fight's going to go is if Charles Oliveira can keep his feet inside the black line in the octagon, I think he wins this fight, whether it's in the grappling or the striking. If Ilia Topuria takes Charles Oliveira down in space, he is at risk of getting submitted. However, if Ilia Topuria can get on the forward pressure and he can push Charles behind that black line closer to the fence, Ilia Topuria will win this fight 100%. Now let's talk about how Ilia does that, especially against a taller opponent, because him being so short in the lightweight division, this is going to be a problem for him. He does not have the best closing of the distance in the sport. He is very, very good, but he does have openings that Charles Oliveira can exploit. So what Ilia Topuria likes to do is a lot of his opponents will just naturally back up because of his power, because of his ability. However, when faced with an opponent that doesn't want to back up, it does have a tendency, as I mentioned earlier, to overswing. Now, what he can do to mitigate that is his pivots. He showed tremendous improvement in the Josh Emmett fight. As Josh Emmett would go to throw strikes, he would pivot, he would counter, and because of the counters, Josh Emmett would be forced on the back foot. Now, if he can slip outside Charles Oliveira's right hand, if he can roll under the lead hook of Oliveira, if he can step outside of the lead teep of Oliveira, then this is going to be problems for Oliveira. And this would be my game plan if I'm Ilia Topuria. I wouldn't be thinking going first. I would think be second and third, not first and third. Now, the third is going to be the key to this fight. I do think Charles is going to go first most of the time. However, if Charles Oliveira goes first and third, that's a big problem for Ilia Topuria, because that means Ilia Topuria is throwing back, overswinging, and most likely missing. But if Charles throws that right hand, Ilia slips outside, throws, and then he lands, he'll follow it up with a big shot. Now, the biggest key for Ilia Topuria in this fight, in my opinion, is going to be the body work. If he can back Charles Oliveira up, go to the body. If he headhunts, which he doesn't do often, but if he headhunts, Charles Oliveira has a good chin, underrated, very good recoverability, and he's very dangerous for 5 rounds. If he goes to the body, he will break Oliveira down. Thank y'all for watching. Like and subscribe, and check out the next one.